Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Land Development Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Glick. And if this is your first time joining us, each week when you tune in, you'll hear a couple different types of episodes. Either you're going to hear an industry news episode where we pull up a few different headlines, talk about what it means for our industry. And then other weeks, you're going to hear interview style shows. And that's where we have on an individual associated with the land development industry. We talk about their origin story and then dig into some of the projects that they have going on. And today we have an interview style show, and joining me is Michael Wayne, the principal at Detroit Riverside Capital. Michael, thanks for joining me.
Hello and thank you. It's good to be here. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, likewise. So each of these episodes is pretty similar in how we start them out, and it's really just kind of digging into your past, how you ended up getting into real estate to begin with. I think it's pretty interesting, as I talk to more and more people, just, some people not having anything to do with real estate and then just they have a conversation with somebody and it ends up bringing them into the industry. And other people, they just know from the beginning that maybe a family member, or maybe it's a family business, or they just get into something related to real estate. So interested in hearing your story, how you got into the real estate industry.
Of course. Yeah, my story is not the most common, I guess you'd say, because we kind of started drinking out of the fire hose. Our very first project was a big infill development in the middle of the downtown. And in hindsight, it was an unusual way to begin. So the story goes, I was working as a consultant in Chicago. I did like transaction advisory work for one of the big consulting firms and enjoyed it, learned a lot. Got the job out of school mostly because I wanted to get a quote unquote real job before I endeavored into the entrepreneurial universe. But I had studied entrepreneurship and, my whole life I'd been an entrepreneur. I'd started a couple of businesses, um, in high school and a couple through college. And so I knew ultimately that entrepreneurship was something I wanted to pursue, but I started with the traditional 9 to 5 to at least put my degree to use for a little while. So that lasted only about 18 months. And through that process, I was researching various businesses to pursue. And, I looked at everything, the Amazon stuff, tech companies. Everyone thinks they have the next great app idea. So I thought of plenty of those. And ultimately, I kept coming back to real estate because it's such a tried and true business model. It's a foundation and a cornerstone of what our country was built on and how we perceive value in the world. And so I knew it wasn't going anywhere, and I liked that aspect of it. And then, I also have always had an affinity for construction. When I was a young kid, my mom would take me to different construction sites, either in the neighborhood or throughout town, and let me play with the digger trucks, as they used to call them back in the day. And, I'd ask for rides on the bulldozer and everything. So I'd always had this connection to construction. And so I was able to kind of marry those two things up with real estate development specifically. So, the whole story of our first deal is an intricate one and unique, and I'm happy to get into that. But just in general, I got into it because of the tried and true nature, the safety in it. But honestly, now
Yeah.
and it's kind of ironic as well. So
So you went to school at Indiana, and was your anything you did in schooling or anything like that related to real estate?
not at all, other than basic accounting principles that are applicable and that sort of thing, but really no formal real estate education and really not even any exposure to it at school. They at the Kelly School of Business, they have a real estate workshop, and I wasn't a part of that just because at that point in my life, I hadn't directed myself towards real estate, and in hindsight, wish I would have, but had no real experience to speak of. And everything that I needed to know for that first project, I learned on the fly. I learned from those around me, and that was really the key to my start in this industry, was surrounding myself with people that knew what they were doing. Because at the beginning, I did not, and thanks to them, we were able to realize our first project and every project since.
Nice. And yeah, I do want to get into your first project and some of your other projects here in just a second. But I'm definitely interested in the early stages of it when you're just getting into starting your company. And like you said, you're surrounding yourself with other people that know how to do certain things. What did that process look like? How do you find, whether it's business partners or mentors or whatever you're doing, how did you go about, finding the right people to surround yourself with?
So I think a little bit of it is just who your existing network can connect you to. To some extent, it's great to develop this wish list of resources and mentors and people that you want to be associated with. But at the end of the day, it has to be feasible to get connected with those people. So always start thinking small and spider web it out. Who do I know? That knows something about this industry. And that's really what I did with development through one of my dad's connections to a friend of his. He knew a guy that owned a really big construction company in town. And so initially set up a meeting with him, got to know each other, learned about what they did. And it turned out to be a really good fit for the type of product that we were trying to build. And so we really didn't have to look too hard for developing our contractor relationship because it came pretty quick. But other ones, I mostly ask for recommendations. Like, and again, it's kind of like a spider web. A contractor, they're going to know a good architect. They're going to know a good MEP engineer, good structural. They're going to know lending relationships to speak to. And each one of those different resources that you use throughout the development process, they all have people that they've worked with that they can recommend to you. And so that's how we sourced a number of our vendors and have since built our vendor network is just kind of a word of mouth conversational. Hey, who else can we work with on this? And there's some vendors that we've had since the beginning and haven't changed, and there's other vendors that we've cycled through and tried new ones. And so I think that's important too. Always kind of analyzing the team you're working with, and then working to refine that team to best fit your needs.
Nice. Well, let's get into your company. And so, for people who are not, familiar with what it is that you do, how do you generally describe what your company does for, services?
Well, I say that we're a real estate developer and we focus on apartments. And to most people, that's a sufficient explanation. But when you get a little bit more detailed, we are effectively a syndicator for development projects. So, similar to how a lot of syndicators raise money for value add projects, we do the same thing for development deals. So, that's our source of capital. And then, as far as our process goes, on the first couple of deals, we utilized a general contractor and an architect as kind of our two core consultants. And then from there, had a number of other vendors and engineers that were involved. Um, on our next project, we're going to endeavor into self-performing the construction management, so effectively self-GCing, and we'll see how that goes. But that's in an attempt to kind of better organize the process and stay closer to it and fine tune it. There's some things that we liked about our initial GC relationship, but there's some things we think we can improve by doing it ourselves. And it's a smaller project, so wouldn't exactly feel comfortable doing that on a much larger project. But this one's 24 units. It's 6 buildings of 4 units apiece, and so it's pretty bite sized. I mean, 2-story wood frame construction. Very simple on the scale of construction complexity. So we're going to give that a shot. But yeah, so our focus is really on apartments. We're only focused in Southeast Michigan at this time, have aspirations to expand outside of that, but really we're just staying busy with what we have around us right in our backyard. And because of that, haven't been motivated or pushed to go outside of that, but definitely aspire to.
Yeah. So, Southeast Michigan, just curious about, is that where you're from? Is that why you ended up in that location, basically, where you started your company?
Exactly right. Yep. So I was born and raised in Clarkston, Michigan. It's about an hour north of Detroit. And so went to Chicago for a little bit to work for that consulting firm I mentioned. But as I was endeavoring to start the real estate thing, I really felt most comfortable in my backyard. I mean, especially with development, you really want to understand the areas that you're trying to, in our case, bring new housing to. And that tribal knowledge, my family's familiarity with the area, being able to get their opinions on things, it really helps as opposed to going to a place you haven't been before or aren't from. So that's why we started here, and frankly, that's why we're still here because a lot of our opportunities have stemmed from relationships that we built in the area, and so we just continue to leverage those into new projects.
Okay, nice. And I figured that was the case, but I just was just curious, being in that location and you mentioning, going to Chicago for a bit. So, you obviously, when you're starting a company, you have the opportunity to choose where you want to start that company, but it makes a whole lot of sense to do it where you have some of that, knowledge, domain location knowledge, and everything, and the connections as well. Well, let's talk about some of the projects that you have worked on. I mean, I know you talked about one that you're going to be going through the self GC of it, but what maybe walk us through whether it's your first project or some other projects that you've worked on that you can kind of take us through the details of it.
Yeah. So the first one, my pride and joy, my baby. It's called the Jordan. It's in Auburn Hills, and it's on the corner of Auburn and School Road. So it's right in the center of the downtown, and it 4-story mixed use. We have 48 units in it, mix of 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms, and then we have 6,600 feet of retail on the ground level. And so this project came to us by way of a broker relationship, introduced us to a couple of guys. And at the time, they were just looking to raise some capital for the project. We were just getting started and just starting to look at new projects. And at that time, we're really focused on trying to find a value add project, something that already existed that we could buy and renovate and had some resources to. But as this deal came along, we really didn't have a foothold in the value add world. And frankly, it's a little difficult to break into. And we had a lot of interest in the construction side. So we said, you know what, let's give this a shot. And so we started pursuing it. And at that time, they already had like a lender that was interested in the project. They had a property manager. They had already done architectural drawings, gotten the PUD approved. A lot of that entitlement work was already taken care of. So we got fast tracked on all that, which was a very good thing for our first project, because I've come to find out that that is sometimes the most challenging part of a new project. And we were able to bypass that on deal number one, which was a huge help because we had plenty of other stuff we needed to learn. And so we start to put the pieces together. We had the lender at the table. We got them to maintain interest with our involvement. At this point, we had basically told the sellers in this case that we'd rather just buy the deal outright and do it ourselves. And so we'd agreed on that. And then had the bank relationship, had the property manager, had the architectural drawings, had the contractor. And so the sum of all those parts gave us a really good story to go to investors and raise capital. And so we had to raise about $2 million, and it mostly came from like friends and family, or just, relationships of people in our ecosystem that we were able to make a really good case, that we'd put together a good team and a good plan and a good project. And I think it was the expertise of all of those people we had surrounded ourselves with that gave our investors the confidence to come along for the ride. And so far, it's been a very successful project. We built it for $9 million, and it's probably worth 14 or 15 million today. Investors have, done well on the project, and so we're very proud and pleased to have that one complete. And it also became such a springboard for the rest of our career, because had that first one not worked, it would have been really tough to make a case on number 2 and number 3. So a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of stress, but we made our way through it and finished it on budget, on schedule. And our rents have far exceeded, our initial projections. So that's really all you can hope for as a developer.
Yeah, how was that initial, process of going in and essentially pitching the project to the investors? I know you said you surrounded yourself, you obviously had some people with, reputations and experience and stuff in the industry going into it, but was that something that gave you some angst and had you, nervous going in there to actually pitch this deal, your first deal that you were going to be pitching to investors?
Absolutely. No question. I'd be lying if I said it didn't. I mask it pretty well. I've done, random public speaking throughout my life, and Indiana does a really good job at kind of preparing you for some of that. So like on the technical skills, I was well equipped, but it's still nerve wracking going in and asking someone for a 6-figure plus check so that you can build your first real estate project. It's not
Yeah.
exactly a normal request. But I think again, a lot of them believed in what we were trying to do. They believed in us as at least at that time, hardworking individuals that were going to put good oversight, in front of the project. Obviously, they can't rely on our experience because we had none. But I think they saw that fight and hunger in us that they knew, was going to be put to good use to align the right pieces and manage the project effectively. And that's exactly what we were able to do with a lot of very smart people around us.
Nice. Well, no, that's a cool story, first project story. So what have you done since that initial project? What are some other things that you've done, or where you're kind of headed with the company and some future projects?
Sure. Yeah. So the second one was the building that I'm actually sitting in right now. So this is called the Brunswick, and it sits right across the street from Jordan. So it's in that same little downtown that I was describing. And the impetus for this one was much the same as the Jordan. It is in a particular part of Oakland County, which is a part of Metro Detroit that's extremely rich in a lot of corporations are around here. I guess like corporate dense area. There's Stellantis is one of the biggest, one of the big three automotive, but there's countless other automotive suppliers and a lot of healthcare in this area. And so it's just a really, really strong market. And we wanted to kind of double down on our bet on this particular area. So there's a site across the street that was for sale by the city. We acquired that and built a 4-story mixed use, 30,000 feet in total, with the top 2 floors being residential, and then the bottom 2 floors are office space. And it was a unique time to build office because this was right after COVID. Office spaces has a lot of new negative connotations floating around it. But in this particular case, we had half of it already pre-leased to a major financial institution. And so that gave us a lot of confidence. And then the remaining square footage, we used a co-working business model. So we basically have 9 different offices. We have shared conference room, printers, bathrooms, et cetera. And then each of the offices kind of shares those amenities. And so it's designed for, 2 to 4 to 8 person companies, depending on the size of each office. And so that's been successful so far. We have 8 to 9 of them full. We occupy one of them, so it's become our home as well. And
Nice.
it's just been a really, really nice project. And, we've also filled all the apartments in this building. So another challenging one for sure, but, we made our way through. Since this project, we've shifted our focus a little bit away from urban infill development and toward a little bit more suburban. Sprawling is not necessarily the right word, but instead of being in the suburban downtowns, we wanted to build larger projects that are more scalable and repeatable. Because something that's important to note about a mixed-use building like this in downtown is it's a bit of a zoning anomaly. So it typically only works when you can leverage PUDs or other flexible zoning resources like that. And it's tough to find other places to replicate a similar product type. Even if you do, it'll be enough different to where you have to redo engineering, architecture, and the like. And so our goal was, let's develop a model that's a little bit easier to scale, more repeatable. And the way you do that is going into more traditional zoning ordinances like multifamily residential. So our new projects they vary in size. The most, the one we will start the soonest is 24 units, like I was mentioning earlier. And it's a larger floor plan. There's 2 and 3 bedrooms in there, 2-car garages, 1,200 square feet as compared to about 950 square feet in our first couple. And we're really targeting this empty nester demographic. These people that have sold their homes, don't want to deal with maintenance anymore. The kids are off to college, and they're really just looking for something easy, streamlined, and worry-free. And so that's kind of our operating assumption there. And then we have 2 other very large projects that we're working on. Both are 300 plus units. And in those cases, we have like 2 different building types. Those are mixed throughout a site plan with, some, of course, road networks and walking paths and amenity centers and so forth. And so those are sort of in a league of their own. It's another new frontier for me to try to figure out what's involved with a project of that scale, and how do we phase it, and how do we properly finance it. And so we're really escalating our scale, and I think a lot of that has to do with this this focus on a repeatable type model. Because we can spend significantly more time designing and going through the budgeting process on a project that we're going to rebuild and reuse. And so that's what we're doing with these next couple.
Nice. And I would imagine, do you, so as you've gone through this, have you been able to kind of maintain some of your core of those early investors? Have they continued to come along for the ride as you continued on to some of these new projects? Because I imagine if so, that's kind of a cool feeling to have some of the people who were there from the beginning, and now you're starting to get into some of these bigger projects and figuring out that go forward model that you want to try to be able to do in different areas, and might actually translate into even different regions potentially.
Most definitely. Yeah. And we've had exactly that. Our investors are interested in diversification from traditional investment vehicles, and they're interested in consistent cash flow. And so we've been that is our core focus, and been able to do that on the first two projects successfully. And so a lot of them have wanted to continue to build up that diversified investing avenue, and we become a good resource for that. So it's a nice validation to know that you're doing a good enough job for them to want to stick with you, and it definitely helps support our business, because at the end of the day, it's the lifeblood of what we do. If it weren't for investor capital, we wouldn't be able to build these projects. And we always tell people, those are our customer. Our investors are our customer. That is who we act on behalf of. That's who we have a fiduciary obligation to. And so we treat them that way, because we couldn't do it without them.
Nice. No, that's really cool. All right, well, let's switch into the last segment here. So I've got 5 different questions for you that I put together just based off of your past and everything like that, and just want to get your thoughts on some quick thoughts on some of these here. So
Awesome.
first one is, what's the most surprising lesson you've learned so far through your career?
Hmm. I think I'll give a generic answer and then a specific one. But generically, it's just the complexity of what's involved with building a building. Like when you're not in the business and don't understand development, you just see buildings all over the place and think, okay, yeah, that's cool building, whatever. I like the restaurant that's there. Very rarely do people understand what goes into creating that. And so I think one of the biggest lessons for me has just been the complexity of what's involved with the built environment. And it's resulted in this increased respect level and affinity for the brilliant engineers and architects that design the world we live in. So that's been interesting. But I would say, like, specifically related to development, the biggest lesson is, the numbers tell the whole story. So follow the numbers. Always trust that the numbers are your source of truth. I think too often people try to hope for certain outcomes without
Right.
analyzing if there's a reasonable way for the numbers that support those outcomes to achieve what they're looking for. And that is so true in development. Every cent within that budget needs to be well accounted for and audited during the construction process. And the importance of those numbers has been, I've been reminded of that many times through this
Yeah.
short career of mine.
All right. Second one. I know you're passionate about being an entrepreneur. So, what does being an entrepreneur mean to you?
Being an entrepreneur means, it means carving your own path. It means making independent decisions, that no one is forcing you to make, in a sense. Meaning, I guess, in a traditional working environment, you have influences from the top down. And being an entrepreneur, oftentimes you don't have those influences. So there's this independence that comes with the territory. And that can be a good thing and a bad thing. I think sometimes people respond better to some amount of influence or authority, helping them or encouraging them to do their job. And when you're an entrepreneur, you don't have that. You have to be your own cheerleading section and motivate yourself to get done what you need to. And so being an entrepreneur to me means having the ability to do that, self motivate and pursue that passion, that not everyone is cut out to do. So it's a lot harder than it may look. And I commend people that choose this path, because it it's challenging. So
Yep. 100%. 100% agree. Yeah. All right. Next one. What's your approach to dealing with regulatory hurdles, especially as you go through some of these projects and everything and navigating them?
oh goodness, this takes up so much of my time. I think the best way to do it is leveraging relationships within. So, like, in our case, the regulating authority is the township typically, and then from there, it's also the county, and in some cases, the state. And various jurisdictions have various oversight over certain parts of the project. And so I'm literally dealing with a situation right now, where we have a disagreement on how something should be designed. And the way I address that is I built a really good relationship with the township supervisor. And so he has influence, he has ability to get things done that I can't do as the applicant or as the developer. And so, really having relationships with the people that can make influence. And it sounds somewhat obvious, but it kind of is in the end. I mean, these are the people that um, know the decision makers across the regulating body. And sometimes it's the township itself that's the decision maker. And so having those strong relationships with the municipalities has been very, very critical to navigating that. And much beyond that, it's just doing a tremendous amount of research, on your own accord to understand the zoning ordinances and basically the rules of the game that you're trying to play by. And, sometimes these reviewers or the people on the other end of these ordinances, they're human too. They might forget things. And so I've found sometimes I've been able to identify certain parts of zoning ordinances that have been able to help us negotiate for what we wanted in the end. And it was just because these are significant documents with a lot of information in them. And sometimes people can forget things. So being a student of the letter of the law in this case has also helped me navigate that.
Yeah. All right. So let's go on to the fourth one was, how do you handle setbacks during a project?
Whew, there's plenty of them, and the method is maybe much like you'd suspect. I mean, we start by researching every aspect of what we're dealing with. So, like in the case of what I'm working on right now, it's a drainage course for the site that goes into a piece of infrastructure for the local road authority, and they don't want us to make that connection. So I've learned a whole heck of a lot about drainage courses and roadway infrastructures and easements. And I've just gotten really educated on what the subject matter is, because many times it is pretty simple in the end, but it's convoluted and complicated with a whole bunch of terminology and explanation that you just kind of have to sift through to get your arms around it. So we do a lot of research, and then we make fast decisions. And that's really important too. I mean, you don't want to make a decision without necessary piece of information. So that's always a precursor. But as soon as we have the information we need, we make a decision quickly, because ultimately cost is a huge driver. I'm sorry, time is a huge driver of cost. And the longer things take, the more expensive they get. And so we try to really avoid any unnecessary delay by making fast decisions once we have the information, once we feel like we have a thorough amount of information in front of us to make the decision.
Cool. All right. Last one here. So, what advice would you give to someone just getting started in real estate development?
Let's see. So I would say try to find a focus area. I mean, real estate in general is much, much too broad. There are so many niches within real estate. And so if you go into it like a squirrel chasing a nut, you're going to end up at so many different dead ends, because you're never going to get deep enough into one particular niche of real estate to fully understand. And it's too complicated to try to understand it all at once. So I would say niche down as far as you can go into a specific focus area within real estate and become an expert in it. Listen to every podcast you can find, research every blog and influencer account that might be relevant to what you're trying to do, and really become a student of the game. I think that can be dangerous, because that can lead to sort of an analysis paralysis type mindset. So you certainly want to still avoid that. But I think really dedicating yourself to learning the craft is really important. And then second to that, I would say, once you feel like you've established a baseline level, go for it. Go for it. Like, don't delay and overthink things, because had I done that, I don't think we ever would have built our first project, which never would have launched my career. At a certain point, you just have to accept the risk that you're taking and pursue it, because in the end, you learn the best by doing. So analyze, study, but then take action.
Yeah. Great advice. All right. So, what's the best way for people to learn more about your company, connect with you, and learn more about you?
Sure, definitely. Yeah. So check us out at DetroitRiversideCapital.com. And then on Instagram, I do have an account that is multifam Mike. I think there's some underscores between those. And so I'll post some real estate content on there as well. It's a good place to send me a DM or connect with me directly. I'm also on LinkedIn. I believe it's just my name. So you can search that up as well. And always happy to connect with anyone interested in development or wanting to hear more about what we do or has some kind of way we can work together. We've done a number of deals over the years with people that have brought us things and look to partner. And so I always welcome people to do that.
Nice. And I will put all of those details on the show notes page for this episode. So, those of you listening in, if you just look down in the description, you should see the information down there or a link to the show notes page where you can find all the contact information for Michael and his company. So, with that said, that is really all for this episode. Michael, thanks for joining and sharing your story and sharing more about what your company does and some of your projects. It's super interesting and I know helpful for the listeners who are listening in.
Awesome. Happy to do it. Thanks for having me, Ryan.
All right, guys. So that's all for this episode. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks.